In this, I'm going to talk about short notice interviews and basically what is some hopefully useful advice on how to pass them. The first thing I want to talk about here is that for a short notice interview in particular, motivation is something you should be looking at carefully, because there are various ways you could easily get demotivated for such an occasion, such as maybe over-theorizing your interview prep, maybe the fact that you might as well be competing against an internal candidate and you could be the backup candidate too. So long story short, motivation is something you'd want to keep an eye on, not just before the interview, but especially also during the interview as well. And during the interview, what happens is that some people tend to perform for the first 15 minutes at their best and then gradually decline, with the obvious scenario that you might also get stuck. And some people, whenever they get stuck, they remain stuck for the remainder of the session. Anyway, so motivation, be convincing in your answers because it's a short notice interview after all, right? The second thing I want to talk about here is that something which I found helpful for people in this scenario is role play sessions. Okay, probably because role play will help you to understand best where you are with your answers, how you talk, maybe get a little bit of feedback and so on. So role play coaching sessions, that is something that I do quite often for this scenario. Actually, this is how I got the idea to shoot this video as well, right? Number 3 here, try to strategize a little bit your interview. And when I say to strategize, you could think about what is your strength, right? What is your true strength? I mean, not something you think you're good at, but something you're really good at, and try to over-communicate ideally on your strength during the job interview, or look at some core competencies from the job description and maybe, see what you could prepare something interesting from there, with the note that in my experience, and I used to run an HR software business, those job descriptions are nothing more but just clones of previous versions which worked well, and they say, hey, if that worked, it should work. It should be good enough for the occasion as well. So don't rely too much on the information in those job descriptions. Right, and number 3, on strategizing this, would be ideally if you know what they're actually looking for. Because in any job, there are some core competencies that will be the key thing, will be the main thing that they're interested in. Or if you know that, then you should obviously focus on communicating those and think about how your expertise, how your strength would help to fulfill those core competencies they're actually interested in. And these will never show in the job description itself. Okay, so to be clear here. Number 4 here, decide on the story bank, or I should say your interview prep strategy here. So the idea is the following. Not many people are skilled enough to come up with a story bank and on short notice, right? But if communication is your thing, then it does make sense to think about what are my top 5 or top 10 stories that I want to talk about during the interview, and then prepare them and call them a story bank essentially. When preparing a story bank, some people spend even a year to prepare their story banks. So when preparing it, obviously you should find some equilibrium both in the quantity of stories as well in the quality of stories. That is how many times you revise them, so they sound on your strength, for instance. But especially in the case of a short notice interview, not many people will be able to prepare a story bank, which brings me back to my first point, like don't get demotivated by the fact that you cannot prepare a story bank for a short notice interview, but rather think before taking or choosing such an approach, right? Another useful piece of advice I found is that unless you're doing it for entertainment, it's not worth reading too much about the company's culture, leadership principles, and so on, simply because that's not the point, especially in short notice interviews, and those are actually company policies, broad policies, so if you use a number of keywords from their Amazon's leadership principles or from Google's 10 things, that's fine. but don't over theorize on that. That's not the main thing for the purpose of job interview. It never was, right? And last but not least, and probably one of the most important, this is you don't have to answer the questions in a job interview, but rather to use your best stories. Okay, so you'll come across as a much better candidate if you answer with your best story rather than to just answer the question you're getting asked. In most cases, because they can always follow up if they're not happy with your answer. And if I may reframe this a little bit differently, listening skills. So if you have listening skills, this will eat interview prep for breakfast, right? So these were my top tips, if I may call it so, for short notice interviews. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.